The bullet grazed Quinton Ibarra's shoulder as he dove behind the overturned wagon. And in that split second between heartbeats, he wondered if dying alone in the dust of Porterville, California, would be how his story ended. It was April 1878, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the dirt streets of this frontier town nestled in the San Joaquin Valley. Quinton pressed his hand against the shallow wound, more annoyed than hurt. The bank robbers he had been tracking for 3 days were making their escape, and here he was, 32 years old, bleeding in an alley with nobody to care whether he lived or died. He had been a bounty hunter for 8 years now, ever since Sarah died of fever back in Missouri. 8 years of sleeping on hard ground, eating cold beans, and chasing dangerous men across California for money that never seemed to fill the emptiness inside him. The shooting stopped. Quinton peered around the wagon and saw the outlaws racing out of town on horseback, their saddlebags bulging with stolen money. He could give chase, but his own horse was tied up 3 streets over, and the wound needed tending. With a grunt of frustration, he hauled himself to his feet and stumbled toward the main street, where a crowd had gathered outside the Porterville bank. Someone stopped them. A man in a banker's suit was shouting uselessly at the dust cloud disappearing into the distance. Quinton made his way to the town doctor, a grizzled man named Henderson who had seen every kind of wound the West could produce. The doctor cleaned and bandaged the graze with practiced efficiency. "You are getting too old for this line of work," Henderson said, not unkindly. "I am 32, not ancient," Quinton replied. "Old enough to settle down, find a wife, build something instead of just hunting." Quinton paid the doctor and left without responding. He had heard this advice before from well-meaning folks in a dozen different towns. They did not understand that he had already tried the settling down part. He had loved Sarah with everything in him, and when she died, that part of him died too. For years now, he had told himself he was content with solitude. Companionship was for other men, men who had not felt the crushing weight of loss. He had given up hope of ever wanting someone beside him again. He walked to the saloon, ordered whiskey, and sat in the corner nursing both his drink and his wounded pride. The bank robbers had gotten away clean. He would pick up their trail tomorrow, once his shoulders stopped throbbing. The saloon doors swung open, and 3 people entered. A portly man in an expensive suit, a thin woman who looked like a housekeeper, and between them, a young woman whose presence seemed to change the very air in the room. Quinton looked up from his whiskey, and for the first time in 8 years, felt something stir in his chest beyond simple survival. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with auburn hair pinned up in a style that suggested money and breeding, and eyes the color of summer grass that swept the room with barely concealed desperation. Her dress was fine but travel-worn, and she held herself with the rigid posture of someone forcing herself to appear calm. "Please," she was saying to the bartender, her voice carrying a tremor she could not quite hide. "We need rooms for the night. 3 rooms." "We are full up, miss," the bartender said, though Quinton knew for a fact there were at least 4 empty rooms upstairs. The portly man stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Now see here, my good man. This is Miss Georgia Jennings of the Boston Jennings family, and she requires accommodation immediately." Something in the way he said it, something possessive and controlling, made Quinton's jaw tighten. The bartender's expression had not changed. Still full up. Quinton watched Georgia's shoulders slump slightly. She turned to survey the saloon, and her green eyes met his for just a moment. In that brief connection, he saw fear, exhaustion, and a fierce determination not to show either. Then she looked away, and the moment passed. "There must be somewhere else in town," Georgia said quietly. "There is a boarding house 2 streets over," Quinton found himself saying, his voice rough from disuse. "Mrs. Patterson takes travelers, clean beds, decent food." Everyone turned to look at him. The portly man's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but Georgia's face brightened with genuine gratitude. "Thank you so much, sir," she said. "Could you perhaps direct us there?" The portly man grabbed her arm, not gently. "Georgia, we do not need assistance from some common drifter." "Uncle Frederick, please," she said, trying to pull away. "I am simply too tired to wander the streets looking." "Uncle." Quinton filed that away, along with the way Frederick's grip tightened at her words. He stood up, his 6-foot frame unfolding from the chair, and fixed Frederick with the flat stare he usually reserved for outlaws. "Mrs. Patterson's boarding house is 2 streets north, 1 street west," he said directly to Georgia, ignoring her uncle entirely. "Big white house with blue shutters. Tell her Quinton Ibarra sent you. She will give you fair rates." Frederick's face reddened. "How dare you address my niece directly? Georgia, we are leaving. We will sleep in the wagon if necessary." But Georgia was already moving toward the door, her chin lifted in defiance. "Thank you, Mr. Ibarra. We will take your recommendation." She swept out, the housekeeper following quickly. Frederick shot Quinton a look of pure venom before trailing after them. Quinton sat back down and returned to his whiskey, but the liquid had lost its appeal. He kept seeing those green eyes, that flash of gratitude mixed with something else, something that called to him. "That is going to be trouble," the bartender said conversationally. "That man came in earlier asking if anyone knew a bounty hunter. Said his niece ran away from Boston and he needed someone to ensure she got home safely." Quinton's hand stilled on his glass. "She does not look like she wants to go home." "Never does matter what women want, does it?" The bartender shrugged. "Money talks and he has plenty of it." Quinton left the saloon as the sun was setting, painting Porterville's dusty streets in shades of orange and red. He told himself he had no business getting involved in family disputes. He had a trail to follow tomorrow, bank robbers to catch, but his feet carried him toward Mrs. Patterson's boarding house anyway, just to make sure they had found it safely. He stood across the street in the shadows, watching lamplight glow in the windows. Through the thin curtains, he could see figures moving about. Then Georgia appeared at one of the upper windows, looking out at the darkening sky. Even from this distance, he could see the sadness in her posture, the way she wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold something together. She turned her head suddenly, looking directly at where he stood in the shadows. He should have moved, disappeared, but he found himself frozen. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the distance. Then she lifted one hand in a small wave, an acknowledgement, perhaps even a plea. Quinton touched the brim of his hat in response and walked away, his heart pounding harder than it had during the shootout earlier. This was foolish. He did not know this woman. He had no reason to care about her circumstances. But as he lay in his own rented bed that night in a different boarding house on the other side of town, he could not stop thinking about her eyes, about that uncle's grip on her arm, about the way she had thanked him with such genuine warmth for such a small kindness. He had given up hope of finding a companion years ago. He had closed that door and locked it tight. Yet somehow, in the space of a single evening, Georgia Jennings had slipped through his defenses like smoke through a keyhole. The next morning, Quinton was saddling his horse, determined to get back to the business of tracking the bank robbers when he heard raised voices coming from the direction of Mrs. Patterson's place. He paused, listening. A woman's voice, high and distressed. A man's voice, angry and demanding. "Damn it," he muttered, and left his horse tied to the post as he strode toward the commotion. A small crowd had gathered outside the boarding house. Georgia stood on the front porch in a simple day dress, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, facing down her uncle with blazing eyes. "I will not go back, Uncle Frederick," she was saying, her voice shaking but firm. "I will not marry Mr. Hartwick. I told you this in Boston, I told you this on the train, and I am telling you now. I would rather die in this dusty town than spend one day as that man's wife." "You ungrateful child," Frederick roared. "After everything I have done for you, taking you in when your parents died, giving you every advantage. Hartwick is a respected businessman. You should be honored by his offer." "He is 53 years old and has buried 2 wives already under suspicious circumstances," Georgia shot back. "And you know very well you did not take me in out of kindness. You took control of my inheritance and have been spending it freely for 5 years. This marriage is about settling your gambling debts, nothing more." Frederick's hand rose, and Quinton moved without thinking, crossing the space between them in 3 long strides and catching the man's wrist before it could connect with George's face. "I do not think so," Quinton said quietly. Frederick spun on him, sputtering with rage. How dare you interfere in private family matters? Unhand me this instant." "Any matter conducted on a public street is not private," Quinton replied, releasing Frederick's wrist with a slight push that sent the older man stumbling back. He turned to Georgia. "Miss Jennings, are you here of your own free will, or are you being held against your wishes?" She looked at him with such hope it made his chest ache. "I am being forced to return to Boston against my will, Mr. Ibarra. I came to California to escape an arranged marriage to a man I believe to be dangerous. My uncle has followed me to drag me back." "Then the solution is simple," Quinton said. "You are of legal age, I assume. I am 23. Then you are free to go wherever you choose. Your uncle has no legal authority to force you onto a train." Frederick's face had gone purple. "She is a foolish girl who does not understand the world. She has no money, no prospects, no way to support herself. What does she think will happen to her out here?" "She will end up in a brothel or dead in a ditch. I will find employment," Georgia said, lifting her chin. "I can read and write. I can keep accounts. I can teach. I will make my own way. Teaching jobs do not grow on trees, you silly girl. And no respectable family will hire a woman with no references who ran away from her own family." The crowd was murmuring, some in sympathy, some in judgment. Quinton could see Georgia's confidence beginning to waver under the weight of reality. Frederick was not wrong about the difficulties she would face. A woman alone in the West with no connections and no resources would have limited options, most of them unpleasant. "She could work for me," Quinton heard himself say. Everyone stared at him. He stared at himself internally. What was he doing? But the words kept coming. "I need someone to manage my accounts, handle correspondence with the marshal's offices in various towns. A bounty hunter generates a lot of paperwork, room and board included plus wages, perfectly respectable work." It was not entirely a lie. He did have accounts that needed managing, letters that went unanswered for months. But the truth was he had never considered hiring anyone, had never wanted the complication of another person in his life. George's eyes had gone wide. "Truly." "Truly," he confirmed, wondering if he had lost his mind. Frederick let out a bark of bitter laughter. "Oh, this is rich. You expect me to believe you are offering my niece legitimate employment. I was born at night, sir, but not last night. Everyone can see what you really want from her." Quinton's hand moved to his gun, not drawing it, just resting on the grip in a way that made Frederick go quiet. "You will apologize to Miss Jennings for that insinuation," Quinton said, his voice deadly calm. "And then you will leave town, today. Or what? You will shoot me in front of witnesses. Or I will go to the sheriff and tell him you attempted to strike a woman in public, and are trying to force her onto a train against her will. California law takes a dim view of such behavior. You will spend the night in jail, and Miss Jennings will still be free to make her own choices. It was a bluff. The sheriff might not care at all about a family dispute, but Frederick did not know that, and his eyes darted nervously to the crowd, calculating the social cost. "This is not over," Frederick hissed, but he turned to Georgia, his expression hardening into cold fury. "When you come crawling back, and you will, do not expect any help from me. You will be dead to me, do you understand? Dead. Your inheritance will be gone, spent to cover your ingratitude. You will have nothing." "I already have nothing," Georgia said softly. "You spent my parents' money years ago. At least now I have my freedom." Frederick stormed off toward the train station, the housekeeper scurrying after him with an apologetic glance at Georgia. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring among themselves about the morning's entertainment. Mrs. Patterson, who had been watching from her doorway, approached with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Ibarra, you are a decent man to help the young lady, but you know how people will talk if she is traveling with you unchaperoned." Quinton nodded slowly. He had not thought that far ahead. "I suppose that is a problem." "I have a solution," Mrs. Patterson said. "My sister runs a boarding house in Fresno. I have been meaning to visit her for months. I could travel with you as far as Fresno, serve as chaperone for Miss Jennings. That is, if you are truly heading north." Quinton had not planned to head north. His bank robbers had gone south. But he found himself nodding anyway. "Fresno sounds fine. I can pick up work there as easily as anywhere." Georgia was standing very still, her hands clasped in front of her, watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Mr. Ibarra, I do not wish to be a burden. If this offer was made simply out of pity or a sense of chivalry, please tell me now. I can find another way." He looked at her directly, this brave, desperate woman who had fought her uncle in front of a crowd rather than surrender her freedom. "I do not do things out of pity, Miss Jennings. If I offered, I meant it. But you should know what you are agreeing to. Bounty hunting is not a respectable profession. I spend weeks on the trail, sleeping rough, occasionally getting shot at. The towns I pass through are not always civilized. If you work for me, your life will not be comfortable or predictable." "It will be mine," she said simply. "That is all I ask." Something shifted in Quinton's chest, like a door he thought was sealed tight creaking open just an inch. He nodded. "We leave tomorrow morning. Pack light. The wagon carries supplies, not luxuries." Georgia smiled then, really smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Thank you, Mr. Ibarra. You have given me a gift beyond measure." He tipped his hat and walked away before she could see how her words affected him. Given her a gift. She had no idea what she had given him. After 8 years of numb existence, of moving through life like a ghost, he felt something stirring inside him again. Fear, yes, but also anticipation. Hope, though he was afraid to name it that. He went to the general store and bought supplies for the journey north, plus an extra bedroll and some spare clothes that might fit Georgia. As an afterthought, he added a small pistol with ammunition. If she was going to be out in the wilderness, she needed to know how to defend herself. That evening, he returned to Mrs. Patterson's to finalize the arrangements. Georgia met him in the parlor, her expression nervous but determined. "I must confess something," she said once they were alone. "I have never done bookkeeping professionally. I learned from my father, and I managed the household accounts after my parents died, but I do not know if my skills are adequate for your needs. Can you write clearly? Yes. Can you add and subtract without error? Yes. Can you follow instructions? Yes. Then you will be fine. Most of the marshals I work with can barely read. Your letters will be an improvement regardless." She relaxed slightly. May I ask you something personal, Mr. Ibarra, Quinton? If we are going to travel together, you should use my given name, Quinton, then, and you should call me Georgia. She paused, gathering courage. Why did you help me? You do not know me. You have no reason to complicate your life with my problems. He was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer. 8 years ago, I lost my wife to fever. Since then, I have been alone by choice. I convinced myself I preferred it that way. But this morning, when I saw you standing up to your uncle, refusing to let him break your spirit, I remembered something. I remembered what it feels like to care about someone else's welfare more than my own convenience. You reminded me I am still capable of that, so perhaps you are helping me as much as I am helping you. Georgia's eyes had filled with tears. I am sorry about your wife. It was a long time ago. Grief does not care about time, she said softly. My parents died 5 years ago in a carriage accident. Some days it feels like yesterday. They sat in companionable silence for a while, two people who had known loss, who understood the weight of it. Finally, Georgia spoke again. I should tell you about Mr. Hartwick, so you understand what I was running from. He is a wealthy merchant in Boston, very respected in society. But there are rumors. His first wife died falling down the stairs. His second wife died of an accidental overdose of laudanum. Both deaths were ruled accidental, but people whispered. When my uncle told me Hartwick had offered for my hand, I began asking questions. I spoke to servants, to people who had known the wives. Every person I talked to said the same thing. Both women had been terrified of him in the months before they died. Both had tried to leave, and both had ended up dead. Quinton felt cold anger settle in his gut. Your uncle knew this. I told him my concerns. He said I was being hysterical, that women always gossip and invent drama. He said my inheritance was gone and I had no choice but to make an advantageous marriage. When I refused, he locked me in my room and made arrangements to escort me to Hartwick's estate personally. I escaped the night before we were supposed to leave and used the last of my personal money to buy a train ticket west. I thought if I could get far enough away, disappear into the frontier, I would be safe. But Uncle Frederick has more resources than I anticipated. He will not find you now, Quinton said. And if he tries, he will have to go through me. Georgia reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his just for a moment. The touch was electric, sending warmth racing up his arm. I will earn my place, Quinton, I promise. I will work hard and not complain. You will not regret helping me. But as she withdrew her hand and said good night, climbing the stairs to her room, Quinton suspected he already regretted it, though not in the way she meant. He regretted it because after only one day, Georgia Jennings had already begun to matter to him. She had slipped past his defenses without even trying, and caring about people, as he had learned so painfully with Sarah, only led to hurt. Yet he could not bring himself to wish he had walked away. For the first time in 8 years, he felt alive. They departed Porterville at dawn, with Mrs. Patterson wedged comfortably on the wagon seat between Quinton and Georgia. The older woman chattered pleasantly about her sister in Fresno, about the changing landscape of California, about anything and everything. It should have been annoying, but Quinton found it oddly soothing. The normalcy of it, the simple domesticity of traveling with companions rather than riding alone. Georgia was quiet, watching the landscape roll past with wide eyes. She had probably never been west of the Mississippi before a week ago, and the vast openness of California must have seemed like another world compared to Boston. It is beautiful, she said softly as they passed through hills dotted with wildflowers. I did not expect it to be beautiful. Most people think it is just desert, Quinton replied, but California has everything. Mountains, valleys, forests, coastline. It is a whole world in one state. Have you traveled all of it, most of it? Chasing bounties takes you everywhere. You enjoy it. The traveling, I mean. He considered the question seriously. I used to think I did. Now I am not sure I enjoy it so much as I need it. Staying in one place feels wrong. Too many memories, maybe. Mrs. Patterson patted his arm sympathetically. You cannot run from grief forever, young man. Eventually you have to stop and face it. Perhaps, Quinton said noncommittally. They stopped for lunch beside a creek, and Quinton taught Georgia how to load and fire the pistol he had bought her. She proved to be a quick learner, steady-handed and focused. You have done this before, he observed. My father taught me to shoot when I was young. He believed women should know how to protect themselves. My uncle sold all father's guns after he took over the household. Your uncle is a fool, Quinton said bluntly. Out here, everyone needs to know how to handle a weapon. Even Mrs. Patterson probably has a Derringer in her reticule. I most certainly do, Mrs. Patterson confirmed cheerfully. Georgia laughed, a bright, genuine sound that made Quinton's heart skip. He busied himself cleaning up the lunch remains to avoid looking at her, afraid his face would reveal too much. They reached Fresno 3 days later. Mrs. Patterson's sister welcomed them warmly and insisted they stay for dinner. Over roasted chicken and potatoes, Quinton found himself relaxing in a way he had not done in years, participating in easy conversation, even laughing at the sisters' banter. Georgia fit into the domestic scene naturally, helping clear dishes, asking questions about Fresno and the surrounding area with genuine interest. She had removed her travel jacket and rolled up her sleeves, and Quinton found his gaze drawn to the elegant line of her neck, the way lamplight caught in her auburn hair. He forced himself to look away. This was dangerous territory. She was his employee, a woman he was helping, nothing more. She had just escaped one man trying to control her life. She did not need another man complicating things with unwanted feelings. But that night, as they prepared to leave the next morning, Georgia came to him in the small parlor where he was reviewing his maps. "May I speak with you?" she asked. Of course. She sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap. I have been thinking about the arrangement. You have been very kind, but I do not wish to be a burden indefinitely. I was wondering if you could help me find a position in Fresno, perhaps as a governess or a clerk. Then you could continue your work without worrying about my welfare. Quinton looked up from his maps, surprised by the sharp disappointment he felt. You want to stay here. I want to be practical. You saved me from my uncle, gave me safe passage this far. But I cannot follow you around California forever. You need to be free to do your work, and I need to establish independence. Everything she said made perfect sense. It was logical, reasonable. It was exactly what he should want. But the thought of leaving her here, of continuing alone again, made him feel hollow. Is that what you want? He asked carefully. Or is that what you think you should want? Georgia bit her lip. I do not know, I feel. I should not impose on you further. You have done so much already. You are not an imposition, Georgia. The words came out more intensely than he intended. He softened his tone. I meant what I said about needing help with my work. These past few days, having someone to talk to, someone to share the journey with, it has been good. I had forgotten how good. If you want to stay in Fresno and build a life here, I will help you do that. But if you want to continue traveling, learning the trade, seeing more of California, then I want you to stay. She looked at him with those green eyes searching his face. You truly want me to stay? Yes. Why? He should lie. He should say something about her usefulness, about the convenience of having a bookkeeper. But looking at her, he found he could not. Because when I am with you, I do not feel alone anymore, he said quietly. For 8 years I have been alone even in crowded rooms. But with you, I feel connected to the world again. I did not realize how much I missed that until you appeared." Georgia's breath caught. "Quinton, I feel the same way. These past few days, despite everything, despite running from my uncle and sleeping in unfamiliar beds and not knowing what the future holds, I have been happy. Because of you. Because you treat me like a person who matters, whose thoughts and choices are important. Do you know how rare that is?" He reached across the table and took her hand, marveling at how right it felt, her small hand in his calloused one. "Then stay. We will figure out the rest as we go." "I will stay," she whispered, "as long as you want me." He wanted to say forever, but it was too soon, too fast. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently and smiled. "Then we should get some sleep. Long ride tomorrow." But neither of them moved, their hands still linked across the table, both afraid that breaking the connection would break the spell. Finally, Mrs. Patterson's sister bustled in to bank the fire for the night, and they reluctantly separated, each retreating to their rooms. But Quinton lay awake for hours, his heart pounding, thinking about Georgia's hand in his, about the way she had looked at him, about the possibility of hope he had thought dead and buried. They left Fresno the next morning, just the two of them now, and the world felt simultaneously bigger and more intimate. Without Mrs. Patterson's cheerful chatter, they talked more, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Georgia told him about growing up in Boston, about her father's shipping business and her mother's love of music, about the devastating loss when they died and her uncle's cruel indifference to her grief. Quinton told her about Missouri, about the small farm he and Sarah had been building, about her laugh and her kindness and the fever that took her in less than a week. He told her about the years of drifting afterward, how bounty hunting had given him purpose but not peace. "Do you think you will ever have peace?" Georgia asked. "I do not know. Maybe peace is not the point. Maybe the point is finding something worth the unrest." She smiled at that. "I like that philosophy." They stopped in small towns along the way north, and Quinton introduced Georgia to the work. She sat beside him in Marshall's offices, taking notes on wanted men, learning the system of rewards and captures. She proved to have a knack for organization, creating a filing system for his accumulated papers that made everything more manageable. In the evenings, when they made camp, she helped with the cooking and the chores without complaint. Quinton taught her how to track, how to read signs in the dirt, how to sense when something was wrong. She absorbed everything like a sponge, asking intelligent questions, making connections he had not expected. "You could be a bounty hunter yourself if you wanted," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "I do not think I have the temperament for confrontation," she said. "But I like being part of it, helping. It feels like we are doing something important, bringing dangerous men to justice. Not all bounty hunters think of it that way. Some are just in it for the money. But you are not. I can tell. You care about making things safer for ordinary people." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just do the work. You do it with honor, though. That matters." They had been on the trail for 2 weeks when they got word of a wanted man holed up in a mining camp near Sacramento. Joseph Turner, wanted for armed robbery and assault. $500 reward. Quinton decided to pursue it. "You should stay in the town," he told Georgia as they approached the mining camp. "This could get dangerous." "I can help," she protested. "I know you can, but I need to focus on Turner, not worry about you getting caught in crossfire." She looked hurt but nodded. "I understand." He left her at a boarding house in Sacramento with strict instructions to stay put and took the last leg to the mining camp alone. It felt wrong, riding without her beside him, the silence oppressive after growing accustomed to her presence. The mining camp was rough even by frontier standards, a collection of tents and ramshackle buildings clinging to a hillside. Quinton found Turner in a saloon, drunk and belligerent. The arrest went badly. Turner drew on him, and Quinton was forced to shoot him in the leg. Other miners, friends of Turner's, took exception to this, and a brawl erupted. Quinton fought his way out, dragging the wounded Turner with him, but took a knife slash across his ribs in the process. He made it back to Sacramento barely conscious, Turner tied to the back of his horse, blood soaking through his shirt. Georgia met him at the boarding house, her face going white when she saw the blood. "Dear God, Quinton, just a scratch," he mumbled, sliding off his horse and nearly collapsing. She caught him, surprisingly strong, and helped him inside. The next hours were a blur. Georgia cleaned his wound, stitched it with steady hands while he gritted his teeth against the pain. She got Turner secured in the town jail and collected the reward money. She tended Quinton through a feverish night, changing bandages, forcing water and medicine down his throat, staying by his bedside when the fever made him delirious, and he called out for Sarah. When he woke the next morning, clear-headed but weak, Georgia was asleep in a chair beside the bed, her hand resting on the blanket near his. She looked exhausted, her hair falling from its pins, dark circles under her eyes. He moved his hand to cover hers, and she woke immediately. "Quinton." "How do you feel?" "Like I was stabbed and then trampled," he said honestly. "But alive, thanks to you." Tears filled her eyes. "I was so scared. When you rode in covered in blood, I thought I was going to lose you. I have only just found you, and I thought you were going to die. I am sorry I frightened you. Do not apologize. Just promise me something, anything. Promise me you will not shut me out when things get dangerous. I know you want to protect me, but I need to be there. If something happens to you, I need to be there." He understood what she was really saying. She had lost her parents suddenly, without warning, without goodbye. She could not bear the thought of losing someone else that way. "I promise," he said. "We face things together from now on." She squeezed his hand, and he saw relief wash over her face. Together. He recovered slowly over the next week, and during that time, their relationship deepened in quiet, profound ways. Georgia read to him in the afternoons, everything from newspapers to dime novels. They played cards to pass the time. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable silences punctuated by easy conversation. And one evening, as the sun set outside the window painting the room in gold, Quinton reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "Georgia," he said softly. She opened her eyes and looked at him with such tenderness it made his chest ache. "I think I am falling in love with you," he said. "I did not expect it. I did not think I could feel this way again. But there it is." She smiled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since that first day in Porterville when you stood up for me without a second thought." He pulled her down gently, mindful of his healing wound, and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "What do we do now?" she whispered. "We keep going," he said. "Together, we see where this takes us." "I would like that very much." They stayed in Sacramento for another month while Quinton healed completely. During that time, they courted properly, taking walks along the river, attending church socials, sharing meals in respectable restaurants. Quinton marveled at the normalcy of it, at how easily Georgia fit into his life, at how right it felt to plan a future that included someone else. When he was fully recovered, they took a job tracking a horse thief through the foothills east of Sacramento. Working together, they caught the man in 3 days. Georgia had suggested checking the smaller ranches rather than the larger, more obvious targets, and she had been right. The thief had been hiding horses at his cousin's small spread. "You have good instincts," Quinton told her as they rode back to town with the captured thief. "I am learning from the best," she replied, smiling at him. That night, in their separate rooms at the boarding house, Quinton lay awake thinking about the future. He had drifted for 8 years, telling himself he was content with no roots, no connections. But the truth was, he had been running. Running from the pain of loss, from the fear of loving again. Georgia had not given him a choice about running anymore. She had walked into his life and made him want to stay in place, to build something permanent. And terrifying as that was, it also felt inevitable, like he had been moving toward her all along without knowing it. The next morning, he went to a jeweler in Sacramento and bought a simple gold ring. That evening, he took Georgia for a walk along the river to a spot where wildflowers grew thick and the water ran clear over smooth stones. "Georgia," he said, taking her hands in his. "I know we have not known each other long, only 2 months. But I am 32 years old and I have learned that life does not wait for us to be ready. I love you. I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like. I want to wake up beside you and fall asleep holding you in face every day knowing you are there. Will you marry me?" She was crying, but smiling so wide it lit up her whole face. "Yes, yes, of course yes." He slipped the ring on her finger and she threw her arms around him, kissing him deeply. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, she said, "I never thought I would be this happy. When I ran from Boston, I thought I was running toward survival. I did not know I was running toward you." "I had given up hope of finding a companion," Quinton said quietly. "I thought that part of my life was over. But you appeared, and I realized hope had found me instead. I did not go looking for you, but here you are, and you are everything I did not know I still needed." They were married a week later by the pastor of Sacramento's Methodist Church, with Mrs. Patterson and her sister traveling from Fresno to serve as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, but Georgia had never looked more beautiful than she did in her plain blue dress with wildflowers in her hair, promising to love and honor him for the rest of her life. They honeymooned by taking a job in the mountains, tracking a forger who had been plaguing the gold camps. They spent their nights under the stars, wrapped in blankets together, talking and laughing and making love with a tenderness that made Quinton's heart ache with gratitude. "I want to tell you something," Georgia said one night as they lay looking up at the constellations. "When I ran from Boston, I was not just running from Mr. Hartwick. I was running from a life where I had no choices, no control, where I was seen as property to be managed. I thought freedom meant being alone, being answerable to no one. But I was wrong. This is freedom, choosing to be with you, building a partnership where we are equals. You have never tried to control me or diminish me. You treat me like I matter. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." "You matter more than you know," Quinton said, pulling her closer. "You saved my life, Georgia, and I do not just mean with the knife wound. You saved me from a life of emptiness, from drifting through the world like a ghost. You made me want to live again." She kissed him, long and slow. "We saved each other then." "I suppose we did." They caught the forger a week later and returned to Sacramento with the reward money. Sitting in their rented room, counting out the cash, Georgia looked thoughtful. "Quinton, what do you want for the future? Do you want to keep bounty hunting forever? Or do you think about doing something else?" He considered the question. "I have been thinking about it, actually. I enjoy the work, but now that I have you, the dangerous parts worry me more. I keep thinking about leaving you alone if something goes wrong. What about you? What do you want?" "I want a home," she said simply. "Not just a place to stay, but a real home. Somewhere we can come back to between jobs, or maybe even somewhere we could settle permanently. I want children eventually. I want to build something that lasts. Where? I do not know. somewhere in California, maybe near the coast or in one of the valleys, somewhere with good land and good people. Quinton nodded slowly. I have money saved, quite a bit actually. I have been collecting bounties for 8 years and had nothing to spend it on. We could buy land, build a house. I could take local work, maybe as a deputy or a sheriff, something that keeps me closer to home. Georgia's eyes lit up. You would do that, give up the traveling. The traveling was just a way to fill time. You are what I want to fill my time with now. You and whatever life we build together. She launched herself at him, nearly knocking him off the chair, covering his face with kisses. I love you so much. Let us do it. Let us find our place and build our home. They spent the next month traveling through California's Central Valley, looking for the right location. They wanted good farmland, access to a decent town, a place with potential for growth. They found it outside a small settlement called Visalia, about 50 miles south of Porterville where they had first met. The land was beautiful. 80 acres of gently rolling hills with a creek running through it, oak trees for shade, and soil rich enough to grow almost anything. There was a small existing cabin, rough but sound, that could serve as temporary housing while they built a proper house. They bought the land with Quinton's saved bounty money and got to work. Quinton did most of the heavy construction, but Georgia worked beside him, learning carpentry, hauling materials, planning the layout. They hired local men to help with the big jobs, and slowly, over the course of 6 months, their house took shape. It was not a mansion, but it was solid and well built, with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a comfortable parlor, and a wide porch that looked out over their land. They planted an orchard, apples, peaches, and walnuts. They started a vegetable garden. They bought chickens and a milk cow. Piece by piece, they built a life. Quinton took a job as deputy sheriff for Tulare County, based in Visalia. The work was less dangerous than bounty hunting, mostly dealing with drunks and the occasional horse thief. Georgia managed their accounts and started a small bookkeeping business, helping local farmers and merchants with their ledgers. They were happy. Deeply, quietly happy in a way Quinton had never expected to be again. He loved coming home to find Georgia in the garden, dirt on her hands and sun in her hair. He loved their evenings on the porch, talking about their days. He loved waking up beside her, her warmth against him, her steady breathing a reminder that he was not alone. A year after they married, Georgia told him she was pregnant. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. We are going to be parents, she said, her hand resting on her still flat belly. Can you believe it? I am going to be the father of your child, he said, his voice rough with emotion. That is the most incredible thing I have ever heard. Their son was born in the spring of 1880, in their bedroom with the midwife from Visalia attending. Quinton held Georgia's hand through the long labor, awed by her strength, terrified something would go wrong. But when the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, perfect in every way, all his fear evaporated into pure joy. What should we name him? Georgia asked, exhausted but radiant, cradling their son. I want to name him after your father, Quinton said. What was his name? Thomas Edward Jennings. Then he is Thomas Edward Ibarra. A good, strong name. They called him Tommy, and he became the center of their world. Quinton marveled at the tiny fingers and toes, the way the baby would grip his thumb with surprising strength, the feeling of holding his son against his chest while Georgia slept. He had not thought he could love anyone as much as he loved Georgia, but Tommy expanded his heart in ways he did not know were possible. Georgia proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, singing to Tommy while she nursed him, laughing at his baby babbling, filling the house with warmth. Watching her, Quinton sometimes felt overwhelmed with gratitude. He had been so lost, so numb for so many years. And now he had this. A wife he adored, a son, a home. It seemed impossible that this was his life. "What are you thinking?" Georgia asked one evening as they sat on the porch, Tommy asleep in her arms, the sun setting over their land. "I am thinking how lucky I am," Quinton said honestly. "How close I came to missing all of this. If your uncle had not followed you to Porterville, if I had not been in that saloon that day, if I had not been brave enough to offer you a job, I would still be alone, drifting, half alive. You changed everything for me." "You changed everything for me too," she said softly. "You gave me freedom and safety and love. You gave me a home and a family. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other those things," Quinton corrected. "That is what partnership means." She leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned gold and pink and purple. Tommy stirred and made a small sound but did not wake. Their chickens settled into their coop for the night. The evening breeze rustled the leaves of their young apple trees. It was an ordinary moment, unremarkable, but to Quinton it was everything. 2 years later their daughter was born. They named her Sarah after Quinton's first wife. He had hesitated to suggest it, unsure if it would hurt too much, but Georgia had insisted. "She was part of your life, part of what made you who you are," Georgia said. "We should honor her memory. I am not threatened by the love you had for her. That love taught you how to love me." So Sarah Elizabeth Ibarra joined their family, a tiny thing with her mother's auburn hair and her father's dark eyes. Tommy, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, constantly checking to make sure she was all right. Life settled into a rhythm. Quinton's work as deputy kept him busy, but not overly so. Their farm prospered. Tommy grew from baby to toddler to little boy, full of energy and questions. Sarah followed her brother everywhere, adoring him completely. In the summers, they sometimes took trips, showing the children the vastness of California. They visited Mrs. Patterson in Fresno, went to San Francisco to see the ocean, traveled to the mountains so the children could see snow. But always, they returned home to Visalia, to their 80 acres, to the life they had built together. Quinton never forgot what it felt like to be lost and alone. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, he would stand on his porch with his coffee, looking out at his land, his children playing in the yard, his wife hanging laundry, and he would think about that day in Porterville. That moment when Georgia Jennings walked into the saloon with desperation in her eyes and changed his life forever. He had given up hope of finding a companion. He had locked that door tight, convinced he was meant to be alone. But hope had found him anyway, in the form of a brave woman running from an unwanted marriage, willing to risk everything for freedom. She had appeared when he needed her most, even though he had not known he needed anyone. And in saving her, he had saved himself. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinton took Georgia back to Porterville. They stood on the street where he had first directed her to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, where her uncle had tried to force her onto a train, where Quinton had offered her a job that changed both their lives. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Running away, giving up your inheritance, choosing this life instead of the comfort and security of Boston." Georgia looked at him like he was crazy. "Regret it? Quinton, you gave me everything that matters. Love, partnership, children, freedom. What is money compared to that? What is a big house in Boston compared to our home in Visalia? I have never regretted a single moment." "I have never regretted it either," he said. "Sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about how different my life could have been. If I had stayed numb, if I had not helped you, if I had kept running from connection and love, I would have missed everything. I would have missed you and Tommy and Sarah and all of this. The thought terrifies me. But you did not miss it, Georgia said, taking his hands. You were brave enough to let me in, even though you were scared. You were strong enough to love again, even though you had lost before. That is what I love most about you, Quinton. Your courage. Your ability to keep going, to keep trying, even when it is hard. He pulled her close, kissing her deeply, not caring who might see. I love you, Georgia Ibarra. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, she replied. Now and forever. They returned home to find Tommy and Sarah being watched by their neighbor, and the children launched themselves at their parents with squeals of delight, talking over each other about their adventures while Mama and Papa were gone. That night, after the children were in bed, Quinton and Georgia made love slowly, tenderly, celebrating a decade of partnership and devotion. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Georgia said, I want more children, at least one more, maybe two. As many as you want, Quinton said, kissing her forehead. I want everything with you, all of it. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I want a life so full of love that we cannot hold it all. We already have that, Georgia whispered, but I am greedy. I want more anyway. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. Then we will have more. More children, more years, more memories. We will fill this house with so much life and love that it spills over. True to their word, 2 more children followed, a son they named Michael and another daughter they named Elena. Their house was indeed full of life and noise and love. The older children helped with the younger ones. The family worked the farm together, attended church together, celebrated holidays and birthdays with increasing numbers of friends and neighbors who had become like family. Quinton watched his children grow with wonder. Tommy inherited his father's serious nature and strong sense of justice, often declaring he would be a lawman like Papa. Sarah was all fire and determination, insisting she would be a doctor despite everyone telling her girls could not be doctors. Michael was gentle and artistic, drawing pictures of the farm and their animals with surprising skill. Elena was still too young to show her personality fully, but she already had her mother's smile and her father's dark eyes. Georgia bloomed in motherhood and in her role as partner and wife. She expanded her bookkeeping business, becoming known throughout the county as someone trustworthy and skilled. She taught Sunday school at their church. She organized fundraisers for the school and the Widows' Fund. She was beloved in Visalia, and Quinton was proud to call her his wife. On a warm evening in the summer of 1890, 12 years after they married, the whole family gathered on the porch after dinner. Tommy, now 10, was reading to his younger siblings. Sarah, 8, kept interrupting with questions. Michael, 5, was drawing in his sketchbook. Elena, 2, was drowsing in Georgia's lap. Quinton sat in his rocking chair, watching his family, and felt a peace so profound it brought tears to his eyes. This was everything. This was what life was meant to be, not the grand adventures or the dangerous pursuits or the solitary drifting. This. Family, love, home. Georgia caught his eye and smiled, understanding without words what he was feeling. She had a gift for that, for reading him, for knowing his heart. Later, after the children were in bed, they walked out to the edge of their property where they could see the stars spread across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. You remember that first night in Porterville? Georgia asked. When you stood in the shadows across from Mrs. Patterson's boarding house and I saw you from the window. I thought you did not notice me. I noticed. I waved at you, remember? I did not know who you were yet, but I knew you were important. I felt it somehow. I felt it too, Quinton admitted. I told myself I was just checking to make sure you were safe. But the truth was, I could not bring myself to walk away from you, Even then, even that first night, some part of me knew. Knew what? That you were going to change my life. That nothing would be the same after you. Georgia turned to face him, her face lit by starlight. I had given up hope too, you know, not of finding love because I had never really known it, but of finding freedom, of finding a place where I could be myself. I thought I would spend my whole life trapped in my uncle's house, or married to a man who terrified me. And then there you were, this serious, kind man who saw me as a person worth defending, who gave me a chance when no one else would. You were my hope, Quinton. You still are. He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. We found each other at exactly the right time, he said. If we had met earlier, I would not have been ready. If we had met later, you might have been lost to that man in Boston. It was meant to be, Georgia, all of it. The pain that came before, the joy we found together, the life we have built. It was all leading to this moment, right here, right now. I believe that, she said softly. I believe we were always meant to find each other. That every step we took, every choice we made was bringing us together. You had given up hope of finding a companion and I appeared. But the truth is, we appeared for each other. Hope found us both. They stood there for a long time, holding each other under the stars. Two people who had been lost and alone finding wholeness in each other's arms. Behind them, their house glowed with lamplight, full of the children they had made together, the life they had built together, the love that would carry them through whatever years remained. Quinton Ibarra had been a ghost for 8 years, haunted by loss, drifting through life with no anchor and no purpose beyond the next bounty. And then Georgia Jennings had walked into a saloon in Porterville with frightened eyes and fierce determination, and everything changed. She had not saved him with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. She had saved him simply by being there, by letting him help her, by showing him that his heart could still feel, that he was still capable of love and connection and hope. And he had saved her in return, not just from her uncle and an unwanted marriage, but from a life of captivity and fear. He had given her freedom and partnership and a home where she could be fully herself. They had saved each other, two broken people making each other whole. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, their children sleeping safe in their beds, their land stretching out fertile and promising around them, Quinton sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For second chances, for unexpected meetings, for a woman brave enough to run toward an uncertain future, and a man brave enough to let her in, for hope, which had found them both when they needed it most, and had given them everything they had never dared to dream possible. They climbed into bed together as they had every night for 12 years and would for decades more to come. Georgia curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, her hand over his heart. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, he replied. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. Forever, she agreed, and drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face. Quinton lay awake a while longer, listening to his wife's breathing, to the quiet sounds of his children sleeping down the hall, to the night birds calling outside. He thought about the long road that had brought him here, about Sarah who he had loved and lost, about the years of emptiness, about a chance encounter in a dusty California town that had changed everything. He had not been looking for Georgia. He had not been looking for anyone. He had given up hoping for companionship, for connection, for love. He had resigned himself to solitude, but hope had found him anyway. Hope had appeared in the form of a woman with green eyes and auburn hair who needed help. And in helping her, in opening his heart just enough to let her in, he had discovered that he was not as dead inside as he thought, that he was still capable of feeling, of caring, of building something beautiful. Georgia had not just given him love, she had given him back his life. And in return, He had given her freedom, safety, partnership, and a love that would never try to control or diminish her. They had built something together that was greater than either of them alone. A family, a home, a legacy of love that would continue through their children and their children's children. As sleep finally claimed him, Quinton's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude. For heartbreak that taught him the value of love, for loss that taught him the preciousness of connection, for years of loneliness that made him appreciate every moment of togetherness. And most of all for Georgia, who had appeared when he needed her most, even though he had not known he needed anyone at all. Hope had found him. Love had found him, and he would spend the rest of his life grateful for both.